Rarely, if ever, do I write out a homily and give it from paper, nearly verbatim. My principle has been, if I can't keep it in my head, how can I expect you to? That would be unjust. And if a homily isn't worth keeping in your head, then what is it good for? The homily exists to preach a message of good news, to encourage, challenge, and call the people of God closer to God Himself, and to elucidate the Scriptures. Preaching has become one of the great joys of my priesthood, as has been preparing the homilies. There are some topics which require much more precision and quality control. On a given weekend, I have 4 masses. About 70% of the homily stays constant throughout them all, but some of the stories, images, examples, or homiletic structure will change, since I am a verbal processor and I come to understand things more deeply by saying them out loud. The problem with this is, sometimes I only judge the clarity of what I said after it has been said. The truth of what I say is always prepared and meditated upon, but despite popular opinion, my second homily was not born out of my love to talk, but rather a need to clarify statements that could be interpreted in unhelpful or simply untrue ways. There are some topics where I cannot afford to have a slip of the tongue or a brain fart, lest it cause damage to the faithful in whom the unclear message resonates. These past few weeks, I have preached about marriage. We have looked at the phrase, "May he entrust his heart to her," from the nuptial blessing, as a blessing of grace prayed upon the husband, that she is to be in a trustworthy manner, is to draw his heart from doing into a deeper form of living, being present. We've looked at the sweet yoke of harmony, which is placed upon the bride and groom, which is at times burdensome, but also life-giving. Just as without the yoke, the oxen cannot unify their labors, nor direct them into the ground to yield a productive sowing and therefore a fruitful harvest, so too man and woman cannot direct their persons into a graced mutual self-giving which overflows into life and love and peace and joy, the fruits of marriage, without the yoke of marriage itself, sacramental union. But, as you know better than I, union requires sacrifice. For two to become one, there must be a death of the individuals as such, so as to have a common life, a communion of persons. Then we looked at the exchange of vows, that the success of marriage can be measured by the sum total of the fidelity of the spouses, regardless of the individual failings of one of the spouses, provided each spouse is humble enough to give and to receive vulnerable forgiveness. Will you forgive me versus the slapped on, I'm sorry. Then there's always hope for growth and peace in the home, and no obstacle can overcome the marriage. But when just one of the spouses stops giving or receiving that forgiveness, things break down. Each of these homilies has focused on the ideal and the calling of marriage. The love between husband and wife is given life and sustenance by an unceasing inner dynamism. The sacrament itself supports it. Remember that the family reflects the life and love of the Trinity. leading the family to ever deeper and more intense communion, which is the foundation and soul of the community of marriage and the family. The family is the foundational unit for society. And where it is weakened, civilization and culture itself is weakened, as well as the next generation. Yet the glory of marriage and the dignity of husband and wife is not always attained by individual couples in holy matrimony. Where human beings have the greatest capacity to reflect God and His peace and generosity, where people are afforded the most intimate place to love, therein also lies the most sinister of places to wound and to lash out. If free will exists, then both loving and the absence of love or wounding will exist. Sometimes what starts out as a beautiful relationship devolves into the ugliest of realities. The corruption of the best is the worst. And a love that finds its beginning in the blissful pleasure of dating, if it fails to be tempered by sacrifice and self-gift, the love of each other will be consumed by self-love and divisiveness. You can see this in nearly all divorced couples. At some point, one or both of them preferred something or someone else to their spouse. This can be work, the need to be productive, the bottle or other substances, the need to feel a certain way, or even a false sense of freedom in which one begins to see one's spouse as the enemy of my ability to do whatever I want. When a couple gets married, they claim in front of their family and friends that they are willing to let their individual good be redefined by the good of their spouse. That security of the mutual setting of each other as the seal on their hearts is protective. And when one fails to make that decision, when one fails to live that decision, when one of them simply gives up, it can be devastating. There is a part of the marriage rite in which the couple is asked questions before they give their free consent. Joe and Sally, have you come here to enter into marriage without coercion, freely and wholeheartedly? That last one, wholeheartedly, is a tough one. To give one's heart means to be in actual possession of one's heart. It means having the integrity, the wholeness of character for a person to be free enough from addiction, self-love, woundedness, mistrust of humanity, so as to actually put his or her own heart and life into the hands of the other. This is rare and requires help on the natural level, and more importantly, it is in need of God's grace if it is to see the end of their days. Yet although holy matrimony is of its very nature a divine institution, the human will too enters into it and performs a most noble part. For each individual marriage, inasmuch as it is a conjugal union of a particular man and woman, arises only from the free consent of the spouses. And this free act of the will, by which each party hands over and accepts those rights proper to the state of marriage, is so necessary to constitute true marriage that it cannot be supplied by any human power. This freedom, however, regards only the question whether the contracting parties really wish to enter upon matrimony or to marry this particular person. But the nature of matrimony is entirely independent of the free will of man, so that if one has once contracted matrimony, he is thereby subject to its divinely made laws and its essential properties. This means that just because people fail at marriage does not mean that marriage, as God has instituted it, beginning with Adam and Eve, is a failed reality. It also means that no one, not even God, can say your yes or your I do in your place on the day you exchange your vows. No one can get married on your behalf. But couples who struggle in their marriage, they're doing it right. Struggle is real and it's good. And divorce happens when the struggle ceases. Trust, vulnerability, placing your life into the hands of a flawed and sinful person until death do you part, is a very difficult thing. But how often do we pray the refrain from the responsorial psalm, "Be with me, Lord, when I am in trouble"? Be with my spouse, Lord, for he is in trouble. Be with our marriage, our family, Lord, for we are in trouble. Or as Americans, do we prefer to fix it ourselves? To make ourselves good enough for God? Or do we have the humility to let him be Savior? Marriage requires grace. Grace helps us to live the yes we proclaimed on the day of our wedding and to have it echo every day thereafter, regardless of success or failure. What I say to you who have been hurt by divorce, or have had one yourself, is first this: you are not alone. If one part of the body suffers, every part suffers with it. Secondly, you are not going to hell because of your divorce. The Catechism reminds us that God predestines no one to hell. For this, a willful turning away from God is necessary, and persistence in it until the end. The failure of a marriage is generally the fruit of one or both parties failing to love or honor the other, and where this has happened, it needs to be repented of. And where there is repentance, there will always be mercy. One spouse can enter into marriage with the best of intentions and with a desire to increase the love in this world, while the other may begin to feed off of that or take it for granted. Love which is not tempered by self-sacrifice will become a self-seeking love. In those cases, the one spouse ceases to love and to honor, ceases to live the very marriage vows which were exchanged the day of the wedding. Some ancient authors have said that hell is a state of being turned in on oneself, curvatus in se, to be a spiritual hunchback, curved in, seeking one's own self. Some, because of various reasons, begin to live that hell here on earth. And in choosing to do so, they try to drag others with them. Overcome by pride and lust, some spouses can forego the promise of exclusivity of marriage and begin to commit adultery. While this is not enough to invalidate a marriage, it deals a wound with incredible pain and breaking a great deal of trust. Sometimes a spouse simply just gives up and says, "I'm out," and without much reason, walks away. Other times a spouse can become, through their own insecurities, possessive, controlling, and abusive to the other spouse, or to the children. The spouse can begin to destroy the home, the feeling of security in children, the financial situation, and all the likes. Neither Jesus nor the Catholic Church ask someone to remain in a living situation where there is harm, danger, or repeated distress. The Catechism itself states, if a civil divorce remains the only possible way of ensuring certain legal rights, the care of the children, or the protection of inheritance, it can be tolerated and does not constitute a moral offense. In short, no one goes to hell because of divorce, which is sought for good reason. Thirdly, if you are divorced, you are not barred from receiving Holy Communion. The reception of Holy Communion is those who faithfully practice their Catholic faith and are faithful to the commandments and teachings of the Church. And being divorced by itself does not prevent you from the fruitful practice of your faith. On the other hand, Jesus says this very clearly in more than one gospel. Everyone who divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. And he who marries a woman divorced from her husband commits adultery. In short, divorce itself is not a problem with one's practice of the Catholic faith. Divorce is a civil reality. Marriage is a divine reality. Divorce and remarriage on one's own terms poses a huge threat to one's humble and obedient practice of the Catholic faith and the spiritual safety offered by the Catholic Church. Those who are divorced and remarried outside of the Catholic Church are not to receive Holy Communion until they have their marriage convalidated or blessed by the Church. If one doesn't take one sacrament seriously, namely marriage and its obligations, how can they take another sacrament seriously, specifically the Eucharist, Jesus' own body and blood? This brings us to a very important teaching, the validity of marriage and the definition of annulments. When the priest asks the couple, "Have you come here freely?" he is asking the couple if they, of their own free will, desire to enter into the institution of marriage, which is indissoluble, meaning not able to be undone, as well as to enter into marriage yoked to the specific person. When a spouse says yes, he or she says yes to both marriage as such, as well as to marriage to the intended spouse. Once the two spouses have given their I do's, they are joined on a spiritual level and given specific protections to share a life together and for the intimacy and vulnerability which will be theirs. Their intention and capacity to love and to honor the other exclusively is necessary to enter into valid sacramental union. Validity means that the sacrament actually happens, the spiritual union takes place, the grace of protection is given. At this point, the marriage cannot be undone. An annulment is better called a declaration of nullity, and it is not Catholic divorce, nor some roundabout undoing of the sacrament. Once a toxic relationship has reached an irreconcilable point where there is no reasonable hope of recovery, a divorce is then sought. neither one of the couple is free to remarry in the Catholic Church. As we've previously said, the sacrament of marriage is indissoluble, meaning it can't be broken or disbanded at will. Divorce is a civil reality. Marriage is a sacramental reality. A declaration of nullity is a statement made by the careful and prudent judges of the tribunal of each diocese who, after having reviewed all of the relevant circumstances around the day of the wedding and the person they were up to that point, determined that either one or both of the spouses was not actually free to make a lifelong marital commitment. If they weren't free, they were therefore incapable of marriage. Since the husband and the wife are the ministers of the sacrament of matrimony, the priest is a witness, an imparter of the nuptial blessing. That is to say, because of some impediment, something holding one or both of them back, as a couple, they could not actually freely make the promises associated with marriage in a mutual sense. Consequently, the marriage is declared null, which means it never took place on a sacramental level. Any children that come from that putative, the supposed marriage, are certainly conceived in love and are not considered illegitimate or bastard children. They are afforded no less right from any other Catholic children in the way of sacraments or faith formation. There are no illegitimate children, only illegitimately exchanged marriage vows. After the court finds this marriage to have been invalidly contracted from the start, both the man and the woman are free to seek to be married in the Catholic Church if they pursue another relationship. Why do I bring all of this up? Especially on a weekend when we're all 1 hour less short of sleep. Why preach on such a heavy topic? Firstly, because I, in the entirety of my 31 years of being a Catholic, have never heard a homily on divorce. But also because, statistically speaking, each of us here has been touched by divorce, and worse, many have spoken in the name of the Catholic Church regarding divorce and remarriage, both on the side of laxity and poisonous lies therein, and on the side of rigorism, to the point of strangling people. If you are married outside of the Catholic Church, please come and seek God's blessing, which is for the relationship with the other, which is supposed to be the safest relationship on earth. If you seek to do it on your own strength, you are kidding yourself, because you and your spouse are flawed, which is why, as Fulton Sheen says, it takes 3 to get married. If you invite God into your marriage, then you invite one who is perfect, one who has the strength for both of your imperfections. If you are divorced, hear this. You are not a second-class citizen in the Catholic Church. Go ahead and look up the book, Divorced, Catholic, Now What? Again, the title of that book is Divorced, Catholic, Now What? And receive these words from this priest right here, right now. You as a divorced person are welcome among us sinners. You are just and much in need of God's grace as well as we are. And we are happy to have you. Nothing is preventing you from receiving Holy Communion because of divorce alone. If you are divorced and remarried outside of the Catholic Church, I invite you to begin the process of seeking an annulment so that you can determine your freedom to enter into the nuptial blessing with the one whom you love. If you are afraid that your current relationship, that your current marriage is close to divorce, I warmly invite you to reach out and to ask for help. There is no shame in that. As St. John Paul II writes, the family finds in the plan of God, the Creator and Redeemer, not only its identity, in what it is, but also in its mission, what it is called to do. The role that God calls the family to perform in history derives from what the family is. Its role represents the dynamic and existential development of what it is. Each family finds within itself a summons that cannot be ignored, and that specifies both its dignity and its responsibility. Family, become what you are. The family is inherently holy, and families are to be holy. By God's grace, you are to be holy, so that many souls will look upon you and seek your source of holiness and happiness, which is God himself. Praised be Jesus Christ.